Guys, welcome to the Worship Keys podcast. So glad you're here. If you've been following along on the YouTube or podcast, you've been hearing me talk about Aerospace audio for just a little bit of time now, in which they have a really cool app and a really cool pedal, which provides atmospheric pads for your worship services or also like your performance on stage, even if it's not like a church setting. And so today I'm talking with the lead owner, sound designer, Isaac. I know so many of people that listen in to the Worship Keys love your products and love the atmospheric pads. And so today's episode is all about how powerful pads can be in your worship services. Many people might not really use atmospheric pads, these textures that kind of enhance the sound of the worship experience. And before we jump in, I would love for you, Isaac, to explain a little bit of your background and why you began to create these atmospheric pads, and even just introduce who Aerospace Audio is and who you guys serve.
Yeah, if you haven't heard of pads, buckle up. They're really cool. And if you use them and you know what they are, then you're already excited about them. I know some people don't like them. They're not for everybody, but honestly, I think the people that dislike them just haven't used them right. So maybe we can shore up some of those things, some of the wrong ways to use pads as we talk about some of the right ways. But I grew up in the church. My dad was a pastor, and we served mostly small churches. And when your dad is a pastor in small churches, you fill whatever void needs filled in terms of what volunteers aren't filling and whatnot. So I kind of jumped into music in that kind of an environment, and we can probably go more into that later if you want. But long story short, I was leading worship for youth group and eventually went to college for youth ministry, and then was doing some worship leading in youth ministry, and then doing just worship leading. And now I build pedals.
Tell us all about Aerospace Audio. What has gone into making these pads, and when did you guys start? What year was that, and how much have y'all advanced and gotten better over the years?
Yeah, I think I've been doing this for about 3 years. It was like late 2020 or kind of mid 2020s when I started having the kind of the development of this product, Atmosphere, which cues those ambient pads we were talking about. And throughout COVID, I live in Portland, Oregon, and it really got shut down. So I needed a hobby, and I just fell into some circuit design and coding, and really wanted to make this device primarily for myself, because I periodically, maybe every year for the past 10 years, would Google like foot controlled soundscapes or like pad foot pedal. And I'm trying to find this device because as I'm a worship leader and volunteers are slim pickings, I'm trying to fill up the sound with pads. And I hated using a phone because some of the apps I was using would crash on me. And when that happens, like it doesn't matter why it happened, you're still in trouble if you're the worship leader.
Right.
So I was just trying to find a better way. And also I felt a little awkward just poking at a phone screen, like while I'm talking to the congregation or in between songs. I had some elderly people like in the church coming up to me, and they're like, "Why are you texting like in between songs?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's so cute. No, I'm not texting." Yeah. So long story short, just felt this pain point of needing to find a better way to cue pads, and I couldn't find one. And so I decided to just build it myself. So I started around 2021 is when I opened for sales, and I sold out of my first batch in I think about 6 minutes or so when I went live. And then a month later, built back up my inventory and sold out even quicker. And then a month later, built up another batch and just sold out. And then, man, I've been moving ever since.
That's incredible. And so the team is really just you and your brother and maybe your wife as well. It's just a real small in-house team. Is that right?
Yeah, it's real small. So it's like mostly me building these pedals, and my brother recently came on team, and he's helping me build them too, and helping with some of the video content and some other things. But yeah, and my wife has been a legend and just supporting this, because she didn't completely understand what ambient pads were, or that there would be a need for this thing. She's like, "It seems super niche." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is, but that's like a good idea." And she supported it and believed in it. And she's really the reason why like I'm able to do this, is because she was a huge support. She learned how to solder and she was building these with me. We were like in an apartment. We were just in this heat wave. It was like 100 degrees in the room and we're just soldering away. It was, yeah, a lot of fun. But yeah, it's a very small team.
That's awesome, man. Tell us about your product. So you have an iOS app that you can run on iPhone, iPad, make the older people in your congregation a little uncomfortable if you're pressing on it, but you can definitely use the phone or the iPad. And then you had this really cool, like you said, a foot pedal, which many keys players will put it on their keyboard too and just click on it instead of having it on the ground sometimes. But tell us about the details of the app and this really cool pedal, which I love this design. You have different designs. You have this space black and the purple and the white, but tell us all about your products, and actually tell us how you went to design and chose the different textures and the pad textures and why you chose them.
That's a big question. Let's see. Okay, I'll start with the pedal. So this is Atmosphere. I'm holding a device that has lights and shows for those listening audio. This is what it sounds like. So it basically just cues these ambient pads and soundscapes. It's got revolving textures. It drones around the root of a key, and it's got foot switches so you can operate it hands-free. So that's the main device. So I created this pedal to replace apps and computers, and then I ended up later creating an app to replace the pedal. Joking, but they work. They have their different strengths and weaknesses. So I also have a pad app. It's called Aeropads. It's on the iOS App Store, and that's really, really easy to use. I tried to make it super inspiring, so that just also drones some of those soundscapes. Sounds a little thinner coming out of phone speakers, but the app is more designed for rehearsal and songwriting and mobile use, whereas the pedal is if you're using pads every single week and you're tired of forgetting your lightning adapter, or we just moved to USB-C and you're forgetting that adapter now, or you haven't bought it yet. That's what I tried to solve with the foot pedal, is I wanted something that could just sit on stage or just be a lot more plug and play. So that's why I created Atmosphere.
So amazing. And I realized when I was testing out this pedal a few months ago, love it, by the way. The design is great. I love this volume knob, very well done. Like, it feels great. Everything feels good about this pedal. Like, it was not cheaply made. This is very high quality. You've done a great job. I could tell it was more of built by a guitarist because of the way that the keys are all in sharps rather than there's no flats. So the inharmonic, like, I was thinking, man, just as a little nuance thing, I was like, okay, I'll change the key and go up. So if I'm on C, go up, C sharp, D, D sharp. But if I go back down, right? So I'm an E, go down. I wish it said E flat, right? Instead of D sharp. But hey, that's just a little nuance thing.
I asked a bunch of my friends that knew a lot more music theory, and I was like, hey, if I'm going to pick like sharps or flats, which one is it? And then they went into this really long dialogue about all the nuances as to why you pick which one when and where, and started talking about F actually being like E sharp, and I was lost. So I was just like, okay, cool. I think I'm going to go with sharp.
Yeah, absolutely. And that'll always work. Always works. And if someone really doesn't know, they'll just think it's a hashtag or something. So.
Yeah.
But really cool. This is a really cool product, and I've seen some, not just small churches use this. I've seen this on really big stages, man, recently. I know Donovan Smith with Phil Wickham is using this. I know Drew Pickens with We Are Messengers and who's playing keys for Tasha Layton. He's using this all the time. Now, I believe Drew's using the pedal version, and Donovan Smith with Phil Wickham, he's even just been using the iPad, just on the iPad, using it to fill in some space. Can you tell us who else is using this app, and who are the other people using your products?
Oh man, it's a lot of people are using. I think some of the ones I like to brag about was I had an order come in from Tyler Joseph last year. He's a lead frontman of 21 Pilots. I had Jay Abrams.
That's awesome.
The director. He also does some music and stuff, and I saw like that order come in with. I was like a huge Lost fan
That's
for the
awesome.
TV series growing up. And my wife actually saw that order come in. She's like, "Did you know J. Abrams bought a pedal?" I was like, "Yeah, but it's not like the real J.J. Abrams." And she's like, well, "Where's the address?" And it was this Californian address, and we looked it up, and it was Bad Robot Productions. And I'm like, "Oh, that is J. I think
That is incredible.
yeah. I think Brandon Lake he got one, and he uses it for smaller shows and songwriting. Matt Redman, man, a lot of the big names that you would expect. Josh Wilson, he uses it a lot on keys. Yeah, it's been
So
pretty fun to
amazing.
see it take off because being in the worship world, this was like all of my heroes, or like just seeing it on
Yes.
stage with Phil Wickham. Like I'm like, oh man, I feel like I'm there. But
Yes. Dude, that is so cool. What's that feeling like of working? Is that your workspace right behind you, by the way? Is that
yeah,
where you work on them?
yeah.
That's so
This is
cool.
this is my workspace. It's in my basement. I'd give you the tour, but I can't move my camera right now, and it's not worth seeing right now. I've been pretty busy, so the busier I get, the
Absolutely.
messier it gets. But yeah, these are all hand built, and I put a lot of effort into them.
Amazing, dude. So let's tell everyone who might not really understand the importance of pads. So pads, of the concept of this in worship music really has, I guess it began in the 90s made popular more by like that Hillsong in the 90s and got more and more popular as the years went on, right? Into the to 2000s and then 2010s, it just kept, pads were becoming louder and more prominent in recordings, in live worship nights and church services eventually. And we know really it starts with maybe an artist and some recordings, and then it'll eventually hit the local church, who will eventually accept like the new methods and new instruments and sounds coming in. Can you tell us the importance of why you would even need a pad in a part of your worship experience and how it can enhance their services?
Yeah, I think pads are really important, especially for worship music, because they really lend themselves for the type of music that we do in church, and that's because something that pads really shine in is adding some dimension to your sound, and they bury some of those mistakes, if you want to call them, or just different like nuances or like distractions. Like I think we've all been there where we've been in a service and like a song ends, and like it's like the energy's high, and then all of a sudden it just gets dead quiet, and you just watch
Mm,
everybody like turning pages, and then
right.
the one tech person swipe their iPad, and then you see capo adjustments, and it just feels like a lot of start stop. Whereas in a church service, we really just want like a nice, solid, seamless flow, because you're trying to
Absolutely.
take people somewhere, you're trying to deliver a message, like that you have goals for a service, and you have a mission that you're trying to install. And when you just start stop, it makes it really hard to engage and follow. So I think the biggest way that pads really help services is they just add like a primer that just helps blend everything together. They really help with sound enhancement, they really help fill dead space, add dimension and character, and it really helps with transitions and underscoring. It just gives something to, so it's not just dead silence under if you're doing like a spoken transition or reading, but it's not
Yeah.
so much music and movement that you're being distracted by the words you're hearing. And honestly, I think one of my favorite ways to use pads is in songwriting and composing, because it's like a primer for a canvas. And sometimes just silence is, if you sit at a piano or a guitar and instruments and you're just like, okay, I want to write a song, I'm feeling a little inspired, and it's just a little daunting because there's too many options for like how many notes you can do. So sometimes just
Right.
cueing a soundscape just takes a little bit of that edge off, and just gives your brain some harmonics to play off of and play with. And yeah, I
Mm.
think that's how I'd summarize why pads are really helpful in church settings. That's like an overview, and we can dive in any one of those areas if you want.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I know many times I've used pads in a church service. Sometimes I'm a big software keys player, and so sometimes I'm like going between one patch or the other, and there is just a few seconds of down space, and having a droning pad go is really good with keeping the flow of that. And I love how you can change the key, and as soon as you engage the new key, it crossfades. There's clean transitions. The flow and transitions is a big space. And in this conversation too, of course, we're not idolizing the pads. We're not saying this is the end all be all. And sometimes in worship services, there needs to be nothing. There's a time and place for everything, right? Ecclesiastes says. So sometimes cut everything out. All instruments, all pads, everything, just the voices, right? There are moments for that. But many times just having that pads, even with the keys completely go out, the acoustic guitar it goes out as well. Everything goes out. It's just that pad. What I love about this too is you can literally loop some of these in a prayer meeting, right? Or if you are the keys player at a prayer meeting or a devotional that's starting off with prayer, you can just have that pads and it feels so good in the room, and you're playing like a felt piano or a soft piano. And it just creates that environment that's just like inviting to really start interceding and praying. I feel like it really gets you into a prayerful mindset, which I love, because prayer has to be crucial as Christians. Our prayer life is our communication with God that we have to keep open. And so I think the Atmosphere pedal and the app and all that is incredible use for worship services, small group services, but yeah, and co-writes and songwriting and even your personal prayer time. Just put it on in your room, in your living room, and just start playing with it. So much inspiration comes with that. So I love this concept. I love the brand, and I love the logo, and y'all have done a great job. So yeah, man, let's jump into some of those practical uses of the pads, such as scripture reading, right? A lot of times churches will have scripture reading, as Isaac with your dad being a pastor. But a lot of times the service might start off with scripture reading, or maybe in between a song, or maybe before the sermon, you guys go ahead and read the scripture. And it's really cool to go underneath the scripture. Now, some people would be opposed to that. They want it to be absolutely nothing, and it's just the scripture being read, nothing else in conjunction with that. But I think it's really powerful to underscore that. So take us through that.
Like, I do understand a lot of people have different preferences and opinions on like whether anything should be played or anything should happen but the word of God. So I want to respect where everybody's coming from with that. But I think pads really help because they're designed to add something, but not too much. Like, they're designed to support the moment, but not manipulate it or change it or fight it. And also for piano playing, like, we've all been there, like either it's the worship leader, the pastor, 30 seconds before a service is, hey, for this transition, do you mind just playing I'm going to read some things, and do you mind just playing underneath that? We can just do that in this key and whatnot. And you're like, oh yeah, sure. And then the whole like first two songs, you're like, what am I going to play? Like, how am I going to play? How much? And I think what a lot of people do is when they're playing, they're a little bit nervous, and they feel like, okay, if I don't play enough, then it just sounds like empty, especially if you have cheaper pianos that don't have really good sustain. And if you hold a chord and it just dies, and then you go to the next chord, it just feels even worse. And I think that's where a lot of people don't music played underneath scripture reading or transitions or verbal transitions, is because it's honestly distracting from the moment and from the words that are very important, and that's what the moment is centered around. So sometimes,
Absolutely.
or you have like those players that are just like so good at piano, but they're playing all over the keyboard and they're throwing 100 notes at it. So it goes both ways. And I think what pads do is they really help just take just some of that edge off. Like, we can be like a little anxious sometimes if you're not super comfortable or confident on keyboard, and all of a sudden the spotlight, it's not on you, but it can feel like that. And it can feel like, oh, everybody's like thinking about what I'm playing, and they shouldn't be. They should be thinking about what's being read. But you just get in your head sometimes, and sometimes pads are for the congregation and for the moment, but they're also for the musician, because it helps the musician just take a breath and kind of get into the moment themselves. So that's why I really like pads for transitions. And I think it's a fine line. I think it's a balance, just like everything in life is a balance. Sometimes reverb and guitar is really cool and is the signature of that modern worship sound, but sometimes you can have too much, and sometimes you don't apply it to every song or for the fourth bridge or whatever it is. And I it is tricky because it's that fine line tightrope that you're walking where you don't want to be manipulative with the music, but also at the same time, I think that God has designed sound. I think there's a reason why music and sound is just this universal language, and just more and more studies come out just every single year about just this crazy effect that sound and music and these vibrations can have, and it's just being used in so many amazing ways, and I think that's by design. So on the note of you don't want to be manipulative with it, but I see playing under moments, and again, it's not every moment you want to play under. I think there are moments where you just want just the raw word of God being read, or just a spoken moment. Just let that be the moment, and you don't need to add anything else to it. But I think sometimes it's like when you watch a movie and like the film score, like if the film score is done really well, like Hans Zimmer, he's my guy. He's like my inspiration for pretty much anything musical. Like anytime a movie comes out and he's tracked it, I know I'm going to choke up during the movie. Interstellar has just got the most beautiful soundtrack ever. And it's so simple. And I think a good soundtrack is in a lot of ways one that like you don't really notice all that much. It just supports what's already happening on screen. I think I like to approach like underscoring or playing underneath transitions is you don't want to manipulate the moments. You don't want to direct people where to go, but what you want to do is just follow what the moment is already doing and just support it, because we're humans. We're so easily distracted. And there's so many studies that show that like music and beats and sound kind of help. Like I like to listen to lo-fi while I'm coding or writing emails, and I write a lot of emails these days, but it just helps me get in the zone and focus. And I think that's what pads and underscoring can do for some of these moments is we're all just humans trying our best, and our attention spans are shorter every single year as more and more things demand them, and we're running through our to-do list even though we're trying to be present in the moment we're in, whether it's in church or a conversation at home. You're just always trying. I feel like it's just always a fight to be in that moment. And I think something that music and sound does so well, and why we use it in worship, is because it really is just this universal thing that we can all get on board with and we can all connect with.
Absolutely. I love that, Isaac. That is incredible. I want you to share with us what's your favorite patch that you've created. Like what's your most popular one, I guess, and then also what's your personal favorite one. And if you would like to go down through some sample different sounds, show us, man. We'd love to hear.
I could showcase the whole thing. So actually, I got to give credit where credit is due. And the Atmosphere sound pack, so that's the 5 sounds that come with the Atmosphere device, kind of the native ones. Were actually designed by my cousin, Christian Harger. He's a producer in Nashville, and he does just incredible work. And he designed these. I basically just gave him the layers of the atmosphere and a little bit of science and identity behind each one and said, I want you to capture this in like sonic form. And I think he did a really great job with it. So my very favorite one, and I'll just work my way up. So this is Troposphere. So this is the first. And atmosphere is obviously wordplay on just the atmosphere that it adds, but also I'm like a huge fan of outer space, and I always have been. I think humans, I can't really give myself too much credit. I think humans always have looked up to the sky and wondered, what are these stars, and map them out and stuff. But I'm a huge fan of space, so I really wanted to nod my brand and product to that. So Troposphere is the first layer of the atmosphere. We're in the troposphere, and that's where all life is. So with this pad, I really just wanted to capture some of that liveliness, some of that lushness, and it's colored green to just symbolize some of that life. And this one is my favorite because it's definitely like the most versatile. Like it has just the perfect amount of, it adds to the moment, and it has these moving harmonics and textures, but it really treads that balance very well. Because if you have too much, then it doesn't make it very versatile to other arrangements. And if you have too little, then that's where like pads can really get annoying. I think when we first started using pads in worship, like technology wasn't quite there yet. We were just droning like sine waves, like mostly with just a little bit of variance. And there wasn't, but now there's just, technology has developed so far where we can make some really cool sounds. So anyway, this is Troposphere. Next up the line is Stratosphere. So this is where all the Like, I really wanted to make this one kind of nebulous as a nod to the clouds. So it's very big, and it has like some airy textures. This one kind of is a little bit more neutral. It doesn't have as many moving textures because it's just trying to capture just that vastness. This one I really like, but it's probably down there for me just because I have some ones I like a little bit more. But oddly enough, I ran like a contest or like a little bit of a March Madness type thing and did these tournament brackets. And this one was really high up, and I was a little bummed for atmosphere or for the Troposphere Pad. Mesosphere is one I've been using a lot lately. So this is the coldest layer of the atmosphere. This one's just real nice, brisk, and icy. I'll turn this up so you can hear some of these like cold textures.
Love that.
And then the next one up is Thermosphere. And this one's just a little bit more warmer. This one brings in a little bit more movement. This is probably tied for Mesosphere for me. This one's red, and it just captures just the warmth of that layer of the atmosphere. And then Exosphere is probably the one people use the least. It has the most, I wanted to, with Exosphere being the transition from Earth to space, I wanted to make this one a little bit more quirky and spacey. So it lends itself a little less to worship music, but this one actually does really well with big band music because it has some thin, it doesn't go too high, it doesn't go too low, and it treads that balance nicely. It has some of that resonant frequencies, which can cut in the big band. Now, so that's the Atmosphere sound pack. There's also, I added later the Orbit sound pack, and that's the one that I designed. So that one, I'll switch over to that real quick here. So that one, I'll walk through this one a little bit faster, but this one I had a lot of fun with. This one I wanted to capture some of the physics and orbiting and capture some of this 3D space. So there's a little bit of revolving textures in some of these. So if you're running your church in stereo, this one's really gonna shine in that. Mono, It's still cool, but it's really designed for stereo. So this first one is aphelion. So this is where you're like at the furthest point in orbit. So this one's kind of has some of that coldness to it. It also has a little bit of this angelic. I made this one a little bit more choral in nature. So this one kind of nods to some of those little bit more interval movement in this one, but nothing is time synced, so it still works with different arrangements. And then gravity, this one, I just pictured like a black hole when I was designing this. And actually all of these pads are in major, neutral, and minor variations, which is something that's been a recent addition. But this one, I really wanted to just have something low and just make it feel like you're pulled into a gravity well. But a lot of the kind of inspiration for this one was I wanted something that would pair very well with a female vocal. So as I was writing this one, I really wanted it to work well with What a Beautiful Name It Is. And I won't play too much of it because I don't want to get us flagged or anything, but... Apparently I forgot the melody, but you get the idea. And I think that's like a great way to use pads is if you kind of contrast. So this pad is just really deep and low and has a slow movement. But if you pair that with the contrast of just this higher, thinner texture, it works really well. So this one's one of my favorites for like intros.
Looks great, man.
And then almost done, just 3 more. This one is called Inertia. One of my favorite bands in high school was Angels and Airwaves. They just have this real spacey sound. That's Tom DeLonge from Blink-182, one of his side projects. It's not worship music, but it does have some really cool spacey sounds to that. So this one, I just wanted to capture some of that sci-fi, just ethereal nature to it. And then this one's perihelion, so this is when you're closest in orbit. And this one's just very warm and has a quicker rotation to it to what would happen to a planet if it's closer in orbit to a sun or star. And then the last one, this one is actually my all-time favorite. I really like Troposphere, but this one's Satellite. And this one I put a lot into. it's really hard to design pads because you have to just listen to them for hours and you're just tuning these micro nuances of like, okay, it needs a little bit more of this. But satellite, I really just wanted to capture that feeling of just floating in space, like just orbiting, because that's what a satellite is. Like we think of satellites like GPS technology, and now they're doing a lot more things now. But while I was designing this, I just had this live feed of the ISS, like just hovering above Earth, and just really wanted to capture some of that just outside of the planet nature to it. And yeah, I get pretty nerdy, but that's some of the sounds here.
I love that, man. I love those. Those sound incredible. And I love the variation. I love the naming, for one. I love the sound design. I love the variation. You've done a great job overall. They sound super great. There are a lot of pads options nowadays. It might not have been 10 years ago or 15 years ago. There are other options for pads, but what I love about Aerospace, what you have done, the atmosphere pedal, is the variations that you have. Some will have a simple app where it's the same texture, it's the same thing. You can change keys, but it's the same thing no matter what. And a lot of different apps, I'm not going to name them all or anything, but a lot of applications, a lot of other companies will do other things, but then they'll also have a pad in there too. But it's one variation of that droning pad, but you guys specialize in pads and make it affordable for churches, make it accessible, make it safeguarded where, hey, you don't have to use computer or iPhone or iPad for this. You can use another pedal, which is really cool. And as a keys player, this is my very first pedal that I've ever owned, and I'm definitely going to start using this a lot at church services, DNOWs, youth events, whatever it may be, because super, super cool. And maybe you're an acoustic guitar player and you're a really small church and you only have acoustic guitar and you use pads. Well, you can use this to change up the textures between your fast songs, slow songs. And I love what you said about the contrast between like a male vocals versus the female vocals, like in What a Beautiful Name. Super cool. Tell us a little bit, which thank you for taking us through all of those. And I hope other people can decide, hey, what's their favorite? I love also the Thermosphere. I thought that was really good. And the Mesosphere, I agree with you on those would be some of my favorites too, as far as those go. Really cool.
With a lot of the pads, I tried to do something different with each one, and I wanted to think through a specific, unique use case for it as I was designing it so that I could have something available for whatever situation you're in. Because I think where a lot of people hate pads is because they all try to capture oftentimes the same type of sound because you don't want to push the boundaries too much. But all that to say, I do try to be aware of not every sound technician knows how to high pass and low pass, so I try not to do anything too crazy that would create problems. But also at the same time, with these pads, I really wanted to make them in such a way that you can sculpt them yourself. So you can set, if you got a system that you really drive that subwoofer and you're afraid about the pad triggering it, you can just low pass like the channel that's on, because Atmosphere actually runs on its own channel. A lot of effect pedals, you run an instrument through it and then it manipulates the sound. So something that's unique about Atmosphere is it looks like an effects pedal, but it's actually just a standalone instrument, which makes it so good for keyboard, is because a lot of guitar pedals are just really sculpted around how it would manipulate a guitar signal and take some of those textures. And while they do really cool things with keyboard, sometimes keyboards can be a little neglected in the effects space. So I really want to bring pedals to keyboards and normalize pedal boards for keyboardists. But
come on now. Yeah, say that again. Normalize the pedals for keyboard players. That's awesome, man. I love that. I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. A few questions from Instagram that were submitted on the Worship Keys page that I want to make sure to ask on their behalf to you, Isaac. So three main questions that I'll ask you and see what you have to say. So I've learned that although you are in Oregon and you said your cousin designed it, he's in Nashville, this has definitely taken off all through. I've seen people use it in Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, and I'm assuming over there in Oregon as well. It's taken off all over the country, but then also internationally as well. And as you said, you're a small team working, and it's really you as the main person hand making these. So imagine the demand. But so here's the first question is, are you making them for Brazil? Is it coming to Brazil? Can people get this pedal? Hey, I live in Brazil.
I'm really trying to expand locations. I don't have any ETA for it. I do have a desire for it because I know a lot of people. I get probably like 15, 20 emails and DMs every day. Hey, can we ship here and whatnot? So I hear you and I see you and I want to make it happen. Unfortunately, long story short, there's just lots of logistics that go into certain locations, and some locations are easier to provide to for others. But I think just the real reason is I want to scale strategically. A lot of startups will have a really great idea and then they'll just try to get as big as they can. And then suddenly quality control goes out the window. Customer service is non-existent. So I'm really trying to scale at a strategic pace because when I do bring this to your area, I want it to be awesome and I want you to have the support you need. So that's my answer right now is I see you, I hear you, I really want to bring it to you, and I don't have an ETA as to when, but I am working on it.
That's awesome. But anywhere they could download the app, right? And still use it.
Yeah, the AeroPads app is on the iOS App Store. Highly recommend it. It's really cool. I've had people, they'll notice the app and then they'll cancel their order for Atmosphere, which I don't care. I really just want people to have what suits them best. And for a lot of people, I think the app is really just a great starting point for pads. And for a lot of people, if you're not, maybe you don't need like the hardware investment, because it is an investment. It's obviously a lot cheaper and easier to provide an app than it is to create a hardware device. But yeah, I would direct you to the AeroPads app. And I also have the sound files available at my website as well. So you can download the full sound packs. And I'm pretty competitive with those prices because I didn't really grow up with money. And I worked at a lot of churches that didn't have any budgets. So I wanted to be cognizant of that. So I try to set everything as low as I can, sometimes a little too low, but I really wanted to make them affordable. And something, I won't go into too much detail, but something that's pretty unique about the pads that I offer on my website is they are natively loopable, which means you can just drag them into a DAW and you can just like stretch that repeat as long as you need it. So
there's no break.
There's no breaks. So what a lot of people do is, and I was doing this for a while too, is they provide their pads in like 10 to 20 minute file lengths or whatever. But the problem with that is you either got to make a decision whether you're going to offer it in MP3 and lose some of that quality so that it's like space efficient on your computer. Actually, I had to delete a ton of stuff from my computer to make room for this podcast when we started growing. So I know a lot of people are just like at the edge of what their computer can hold. So I wanted to make something that was space efficient. So instead of providing these 20-minute files...
No pun intended there, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. So rather than provide these 20-minute files that are just taking up gigabytes upon gigabytes on your computer, especially if you're like one gets a little stale and you want to move to a different sound, what I wanted to do was provide more customization, because pretty much anytime I would use a pad, I drag it into software, I trim off the fades because I don't need them and I like a little bit more control about how quickly it's fading in, because that kind of changes moment to moment or what your use case is. So anyway, long story short, if I don't sell Atmosphere to your area, check out the AeroPads app and check out the WAV files. The WAV files are pretty cool. They come in major, minor, and neutral variations, every single sound pack. There's lots of versatility there.
I think that's great, though, that you're taking the time to be intentional about the quality. It's going to be amazing. People should follow you. We're going to link your website. We're going to link those sound waves. People can access those files and place an order for the pedal, get on the wait list as well, and then can have access to the app as well. All of those links are in the description here on YouTube or in the show notes in podcast, so you guys can check those out immediately. So 2 more questions for you, Isaac, as far as from Instagram here, and I could try to attempt to answer this for you, but one is, how would you make it sound edgier? And before you answer that, I know when you're going through all these different patches, you had certain ideas of the mood in mind. So, hey, this is more for a full band vibe, right? Use this patch. This is for a down moment. This is for the beginning of What a Beautiful Name, or the whole What a Beautiful Name moment for the female vocal. So it's understanding frequencies and everything. But I think the whole idea of Aerospace and pads is not to be edgy. It's to just fill that space in a very centralized way. I don't know. How would you answer that question, man? How can people make it edgier?
I love that question. I need to have that as a descriptor for some of the new pads I have in the works. Some of them are a little, like, kind of push the boundaries a little bit. But yeah, to echo what you said, I tried to, for most of the pads, try to provide something that kind of works for a variety of contexts. But I also, with some of the sounds and also some new sound packs that I have in the works, I want to push the boundaries a little bit, because I know that obviously church loves apps and they work really well in that context, but I also understand a lot of people use this in different contexts. I use it for sound production. I use it in video production, is also an underrated use for pads. You don't have to sift through all these different scores if you just need something a little bit more mellow. But to answer your question, how you can make it a little bit more edgier. So some of the sounds are more edgy than others, but if you want to add some things, I can actually experiment with something right here. So I'm going to move to the Orbit sound pack, and I'm going to cue Inertia. I think that one's kind of one of my edgier ones. It moves a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think something that's really cool about pads is it doesn't just I love how these pads sound just in their raw form, but I don't want you to stop there. So if you're mixing these live, you can give it some more edge just by making some simple EQ adjustments. If I can pull up the 3K range a little bit, we suddenly get a little bit more of that edge. And if I bring it up a little bit more, you really get some of those high tones, and you can sweep through different frequencies, and you'll get more textures hitting in different ways. So EQ is a real simple way to give it some edge. And on that note, if you want to give it less edge, dipping in the 3 to 5K range is a great way to leave some more space for talking, because that's where your sibilance occupies. So with pads, you really want to try to carve out some frequencies that are being used by other instruments or other things happening. So we'll bring that back. And another way, one of my favorite things to add on a soundscape is like tape effects, or run them through like granulizers and stuff like that. So this is just like a tape effect. And if you give it like a little bit of flutter, you can kind of up some of the wear and give it some like mechanic textures and a little bit of wow. And suddenly this pad sounds like a completely different thing. Now that's a pretty extreme example, and you can go crazy with it. Or if you just give it like real subtle tape textures, you get a little bit of pitch deviance, which will make just a thicker sound. I love that question. How can I make pads more edgy? That's one way you can do it, and you can throw on some distortions, but I'll save our ears today, because I always blow out my ears when I'm going through distortion presets. Land on a random
that's
one.
Great.
Running atmosphere through other pedals is a great way too. Like a lot of people I know, they pair atmosphere with other reverbs. So if they want to make the pads even larger or give them just a little bit more wash, throwing them through other reverbs is really nice. Or sometimes I know Chase Bliss makes some really cool pedals that do a lot of cool things that I'm going to try to demo soon. But you can, it basically sets the template for a music bed that you can get pretty creative with.
So cool, man. Great answer. I love that. Another question, which microcontroller are you using in the atmosphere?
I don't know off the top of my head. I should. It's a pretty advanced one. It's got that fine line of like high processing, and then also like nice flexibility, and works with like kind of audio codecs. So sorry, I can't answer that technical one with a more specific answer, but
Awesome. No problem. Cool. Thank you for being on the podcast, taking the time to tell us about the world of pads, how it can be useful. Tell us what's to come in the future. I know you said you're working on getting more pedals out because it's so many people are wanting this. And I'm so fortunate and lucky enough to have this Atmosphere pedal and use it. I'm going to be using it for some DNOWs, some other worship services. And I love this pedal. I think it's super cool, super slick. And again, my very first ever pedal, because I'm a keys player. I'm not a guitar player, and I've never made a pedal board for my keys rig. And I work within MainStage, so everything's layered with sound design in MainStage. But this makes me feel, honestly, dude, this makes me feel really cool. This makes me feel like
it's addicting and it's expensive. I have a long list. 2025 is going to be a really fun year. I've got a lot of things I've been sitting on for a while. I can't give timelines and everything because I just don't know, but like Atmosphere, I love it, but it's just the beginning. I've got other products because like I was a worship leader and I'm still like love diving into music like myself. So really with my products, I try to just solve pain and problems that I feel and that I've had. So there's some problems I'm really looking forward to solving here soon, but I really want to make it magical when it's ready. So I won't spoil what some of those things are, but don't worry, you're safe to still get Atmosphere. And I've got lots of soundscapes, a lot more soundscapes in the works right now. Some more sound packs. So I'm really going to try to do some that are like a little more neutral and versatile, but also push the boundaries on what soundscapes can be. Because I think, yeah, we've been doing ambient pads for a while, but I really feel like this is a new chapter for them because there's just so much more that they're capable of. Because there is so many ways that you can get creative with kind of textures and harmonics in ways that are not too intrusive, but also support the arrangement and give it identity and signature. And yeah, there's a lot of cool things that I have in store for sound packs. And there's a few that are just almost across the finish line, but I really want to prioritize getting Atmosphere built and fulfilling these orders. So
incredible, man. Thank you, Isaac. Definitely check the description of this YouTube video or show notes for podcast for potential discounts on some of your files that are there on the website. And feel free to email me, Carson@theworshipkeys.com. Thank you guys so much for listening and viewing this episode. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's beneficial for keys players, for churches.